Hey guys, Jason here. In today's episode, we're going to go over how to make this wooden 80mm dust boot for your CNC machine. We're going to go over how to design it, how to toolpath it, and we're going to cut it out. All you need for this is a 2x8 and a couple of big band clamps. The beauty of this is if something happens, you just cut another one out. Stick around and let's get into this.
To create a dust boot, we're just going to start a new model. And for my material, we're just using that 2x8. Now, most of the 2x8s are only 7¼ inch wide. And we're only going to be using about 2 feet or 24 inches. I am referencing the bottom left. We're going to start in millimeters. Now, I only started in millimeters to get the spindle size correct. I'm going to start by simply creating the opening for my spindle. Our spindle is 80mm. We're going to make this just a little bit bigger because we want to have a little bit of extra room. So we're going to make this 80.24. I'll press F9 to center that. If we go up here to model and set size, we can change this back from millimeters to inches. And in inches, this is 3.15906. Now we also need to create the circle for the vacuum hose. I'm using a 4-inch hose. If you're using the 2.5-inch hose, you can change this to 2.5 inches, but we're going to be using a 4-inch diameter hose. Now I don't want to make it 4 inches because it would be really rough to get the hose on there. So we're going to make it 3.9 inches. I'm going to hit create. We're just going to hit F9 to center that too. Now using my arrow keys, I'm just going to move this down because I want enough space between the entrance of the spindle and enough room to hook the hose up to the outside of this bottom circle. Now I'm not using any kind of specific spacing or anything. We're just eyeballing it to be close. Now what I want to do is use a offset vector, and for the dust boot we're going to offset this vector inwards, and we're just going to do 1/4 inch. We're going to use an offset vector on the spindle side, except we're going to go outwards, and we're also going to go by 1/4 inch. This is going to give us some meat for the banding that's going to hold our spindle on and the banding that would hold our dust boot on. Now, I'm just going to move these a little closer to each other. We just want to have enough room so that you could put 2 banding clamps in between here. You'll understand better as the design starts to take shape. Okay, now what I need to do is create a boundary or a border around our 2 openings here. So to do this, we're going to use an outward, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these 2 outer circles here. And I'm just using the offset vectors tool. And what I can do is if I grab both of those circles and pull them outwards, you can see that I'm creating these 2 outward vectors that are connecting to each other. This is going to represent the body of our dust boot. So I'm just going to offset it about this much. Now we're going to go into our node editor. What I want to do is I'm going to cut this at the sides of each of these. And I'm going to get rid of this middle part. We're going to take these 2 ends and we're going to connect these together with a line. We're also going to close it with a line. Now we have the shape of our boot. There's a small amount of space between the spindle and the back of the boot. So what I want to do is I want to move this down. I'm using my arrow keys, and I just want to move this down so that it's much closer to this banding strap here. Now I want to have a little bit of room. We have to have enough room here so that on the bottom side, our skirt has enough room to actually be able to push in between here. Now we know that this is 1/4 inch. Our skirt that we're going to be using for the bottom side was 13 inches long, and it was 0.2 inches thick and 0.2 inches deep. So we need at least a 0.2 inch groove to go on the bottom side. So I'm going to take this. This is pretty much the entire top of our boot design. Now what we need to do is make the bottom side design, and we're also going to create a flip side or a side 2 so that we can carve out some of the meat so that we have a space for the chips to go. Now I'm gonna group these vectors together so that I don't lose them. Now what we want to do is start creating the bottom side of our boot. To make this a little less complicated, I'm just gonna take this whole top of the boot and we're gonna move this to a new layer. Let's go up here to vectors and we're gonna call this new layer top side. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna copy this, Control C, and I'm gonna turn off that layer. I'm gonna move back to my default layer and I'm gonna paste Control V and paste my copy onto my default layer. So I have the default layer and I have the top layer. That doesn't look like my name stuck here. Let's see, top layer. All right, so let's go back to the default layer and turn this on. So I have a good copy of that top layer up there. Okay, so now we want to start creating the bottom side of our boot. I'm going to leave the top side active so that we can make sure our bottom side aligns with our top side. Now we're going to create another circle for the skirt that's going to go in the bottom. Now our skirt was 13 inches long. To figure out how big of a circle we need for our 13-inch skirt, we would simply divide 13 by pi. And that's going to give us 4.138 and a bunch of change. But 4.13 is what we're going to go with. So we're just going to create a circle that is 4.13 inches in diameter. I'm going to press F9 to center it. Now this represents our skirt. Now because we don't want the skirt to be perfectly circular, I'm going to close this. What we're going to do is first we're going to move this down. This represents the middle of where the skirt is going to be. Now the skirt was 0.2 inches wide, so this is the center of that 0.2 inches. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go up here to my envelope distort tool. We're going to distort this a little bit. I just want to draw this out and bring it in some. And what I want to do is I want to position this so it's in the middle of between where the spindle is going to be and the outside of the boot. So I'm trying to place this in between the middle of this. Now it needs to be a little bit more narrow on the insides. Let's go back to this envelope distortion. We're going to grab these two and I'm just going to try to get it to the middle like so. And it's okay if the length gets off a little bit. We can always trim that brush if we need to fit. And since this represents the center of our brush groove, we need to make the grooves for the brush. I hope this makes sense. We're going to use an offset vector. And we're going to go with both sides, and we're going to go 0.1 inches to both sides. So 0.1 inch out and 0.1 inch in. That's going to give us our 0.2 inches for the groove that the brush is going to sit in. So these two new vectors we just created represents the groove that our brush is going to go into in the bottom, on the bottom side. So now that we've created that, we can look to see how that's going to fall in between where our spindle is going to sit in relative to the outside of this boot. Now I'm just going to move this up just a little bit so that we have enough room here that this doesn't get thin right in here. Now what we need to do, let's go back to our envelope distortion, and what I want to do is I want to draw this out just a little bit. I'm using my arrow keys to do this. It's a little more accurate. Same thing here. I'm just going to draw this out just a little bit. And again, I'm trying to keep my groove in the middle between the outside and the inside of this spindle. I'm just trying to make sure that this groove falls right in there, because on the bottom side, we're going to cut this, we're going to cut this, and we're going to cut this groove. And we need to have enough material between the groove, the outside, and the inside of the spindle so that it can hold that brush on the bottom side. Hopefully that makes sense. So for our bottom side, we don't need this vector. We don't need, let's ungroup these. We actually don't need that. We don't need that. This is our groove. Let me bring those back. So what I'm going to do here is this is our groove for our brush, and this is the hole the spindle comes down through. Now, I want the hole at this bottom, because this is where our brush, I want this to be the same size or shape as the brush. So with this highlighted, we're going to go back to offset vectors, and we're going to just going to do this manually. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab this line. Let me undo that because I only want to go inward. And I'm just going to grab this line and I'm going to drag it down till it meets our spindle circle, so that the opening for the brush at the bottom goes around the spindle, but then is completely open. So this is the area in which the chips, so you're looking at the bottom side of the boot now. This is where the brush is going to go into. This is the opening, and then this is the body for the bottom. So now we have created the bottom of our boot. We can put this together. I'm going to move this to a new layer. We're going to call this layer boot bottom. So we have our top layer and we have our bottom layer. Let's take all of this. Let's group it together. Now, what I want to do is I want to center this in our material, but then I'm going to drag this down to the end so that we can cut this out. Now, I'm going to leave about a 1/2 inch between the bottom of the material and our boot. We're going to move this one up so we have some space. And then this represents the top and bottom of our boot. Now, this boot design is a two-sided cut. We have this side of the cut, and then we have the bottom side of the cut. For the bottom side of the cut, what we're going to do is we're going to save this project as file, save as, and I'm going to call this 80mm boot side 2. So I'm calling this side 2 because we're actually going to cut and do the other side first. But we wanted to create side 2 first, so that when we flip this over, this is the second thing that we cut out. The other side is just going to be some pocket cuts, so this will make sense in just a minute. Going back to my default layer, now that I have these moved, I'm actually going to ungroup them. And what I want to do is I want to copy these two outside vectors. We're going to make a copy of these. I'm going to turn off those two layers, and I'm going to paste down my copies of those two outer vectors. Now, what I want to do is create a offset from these two vectors, and we're just going to go inwards, and we're going to do a 1/4 inch. So what I want to do is highlight these two, and we're going to move these to a new layer. We're going to call this layer, this is side 1. This is going to be the first cut that we make. Okay, so we have side 1, and then we have the bottom layer and the top layer are going to be side 2. I'm going to turn this back on, and we can save this as side 1. We finished with our design. We're going to just set up all the tool pathing to cut this out. Because we're using a 2x8, the thickness of our wood is about 1.5 inches. So I'm going to go up here to tool paths, and I'm going to go ahead and set up my material at 1.5 inches thick. Now, for side 1, the only cuts we're going to do is a pocket cut inside of these two inner circles. We're not going to be doing any other cuts other than these two pockets. We go to tool paths, and we're going to create a pocket cut. This whole job, we're only going to be using two different bits, the 1/4 inch Jenny compression bit and a 1/8 inch Slim Jim down shear bit. For this side, we're just going to be selecting a compression bit, and I'm using the 1/4 inch Jenny compression from Cadence Manufacturing. These are really great bits. I'll have a link in the description below if you're interested in these bits. We want to set our depth to 1 inch. That's going to leave us a 1/2 inch of material for our top side. We're going to be using an offset. I'm going to start from the inside. I'm not worried about ramping. So we calculate that tool path, and that's going to complete side 1. At this point, what we would want to do is go out, turn our material over after doing side 1, and we're going to start on side 2. We're going to turn off side 1, and I'm actually going to turn off the tool pathing from that so we don't see it. We're going to turn back on our top and bottom layer. And the next tool path we're going to do is an area clearance for our openings. So for these 3 openings, we're going to create another area clearance. This time we're going to finish at, because we cut down 1 inch on the other side, we only need to do a 1/2 inch, but I want to make sure it goes all the way through. So I'm going to go 0.51. We're going to use that 1/4 inch Jenny compression bit, the same bit we used before, offset starting on the inside. And that's going to carve out the 3 openings. Let's go back to our tool paths, close this off. The next thing that we need to cut is the groove for the skirt. Now for this groove, it's only 0.2 inches wide. We need to carve this with a 1/8 inch bit. So we're gonna do another area clearance. But for the final depth here, we're just gonna go to a 1/4 inch. I'm using a 1/8 inch Slim Jim down shear bit. This is another one from Cadence Manufacturing. I'm gonna slow this down because it's a singular plunge. We're going to go down to 80 inches a minute, 40 inch a minute plunge. I'm going to use offset again. We're going to calculate that, and that's going to cut our groove for our brush. The next toolpath we're going to do is going to be to cut the top portion of our top layer. So to do this, we're going to select these two outer vectors and the border vector. Now I'm going to do another area clearance, and for this we're going to go to a finished depth. Let's make it 0.35. We have a 1/2 inch of material, so that's going to leave 0.15 inches left. We're going to do this with the 1/4 inch compression bit using offset again. This time we're going to start from the outside. Okay, so I noticed that the 1/4 inch didn't go around the outside of this. We're going to switch to 1/8 inch bit. So we swapped over to that 1/8 inch bit. I wanted to make sure that we were carving around the outside because this is where our banding clamp, or the clamp that's going to clamp down on the spindle, is going to go. It has to go around the outside of this material here in order to be able to clamp down. Now that we've finished with those, the last toolpath we need to do is a profile pass to cut this out. We are cutting to a depth of 1.5 inches. We're going to be using the compression bit again. I'm going to slow this down. We're going to use a 80, 40. Because this is a profile cut, I always slow my profile cuts down. You don't want to get any tear out, and you really want this to go as slow as possible so that you don't have any tear out when it comes to this really close to where this groove is in the back. I do want to add bridges, but I only want 2 bridges, and we're going to make those a 1/4 inch each, 1/4 inch tall, 1/4 inch thick. That's perfectly fine, and we're going to calculate. Okay, we've created all the tool pathing. We're ready to save these and go out to the machine and start cutting. I'll see you out at the shop. We have our material secured, and we're ready to start side 1. With our pocket cuts done, we're just going to flip over our material and start on the other side. I have a piece of tape and a board that marks my corner. So when I flip this over, I'm just going to align the board so that it aligns with my tape and my board. And that's going to make sure that we're square for the other side. Now that our board is secure, we're ready to start the second side, and the first cut is going to be the pocket cuts. Okay, now that our pocket cuts are done, we're ready to change over to our 1/8 inch bit and do the bottom groove and our top cut. Okay, now that those two cuts are done, we're ready to change over to our 1/4 inch compression bit and do our final profile pass that's going to cut out these two parts. Now that they're cut out, all we're going to do is pop these out and glue the two halves together.
Okay, now that we have our two halves glued together, now all I did was put some glue on the two pieces and clamp them together. I did sand a little bit to try and make it match up evenly to look good, but it doesn't have to be exact. Now the skirt that I'm using came from the Suck It dust boot that comes from the Onefinity CNC. Now this skirt material, you can buy this on Amazon. I'll leave a link in the description below, but you can get this stuff in various lengths and sizes. All we're going to do to mount this is to push this down into the groove. So the skirt just pushes down in this groove. Just like so. And now that's nice and secure. Now all we have to do is put our banding clamps on and mount this to our spindle. To mount this to the spindle, all you have to do is just basically, you may have to sand this some to get it to fit, but what you want to do is have a nice little snug fit. And generally, I will mount this so that the collet nut is at the same height as this skirt. That way, if the collet nut goes all the way down to the material, you're not hitting the boot. So as long as you have that collet nut below the skirt material or below the wood there, you should be fine. And that just rides up and down with the spindle. And then the hose just clamps on to the top here like this. And when you're ready to change bits, you can loosen this and take this down. I've been using this boot now for about 4 years with the 65mm. I'm going to leave links to both this and the 65mm spindle in the description below in case you don't want to go through that entire design process.
If you found this tutorial helpful, give us a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to the channel and share this with someone. I'd like to give a big thanks to all of our Timberfalls Elite members. You guys keep the bit spinning and we really appreciate your support. If you're interested in becoming a Timberfalls Elite, check out the link below or our website at timberfalls.us.
Thanks guys, have a great one.